about second breakfast.
Time for second breakfast.
Hello, Monster here from Breakdowns for Breakfast with another exciting episode of Second Breakfast. I saw something the other day on social media that I don't know if it was meant to be rage bait, but for me, I raged out pretty hard. I saw a page on Instagram list the top 10 NuMetal bands of all time. And this list infuriated me. Now, not to say that it's all wrong, but I'm going to reveal their list to you, and it shouldn't be hard to explain why it's completely wrong. And then also, I'm going to give you my top 10 NuMetal bands of all time. Now, when I was compiling my list, I was thinking about a few different things. Number one, cultural impact. Perhaps these aren't the best musically, but they've had songs that reached a wider audience than a lot of quote-unquote nu metal could. Secondly, I try to think of bands that were consistently nu metal. Most bands have kind of shifted in and out of the genre, and there's an argument to be made about a few of these bands either not being nu metal anymore, or they kind of went away from it and came back. But ultimately, to me at least, I've always defined nu metal as heavy music that mixed a lot of different styles. That's why even back in the day when nu metal was first starting, you had bands like Slipknot, which, was pulling influences from, yes, rap and hip hop along with the metal, but they were also mixing like thrash metal and black metal right alongside Limp Bizkit, who was mixing, rap and hip hop and the turntables with the heavy riffs and that kind of thing. So for me, I've always sort of gotten, I don't want to say in the weeds with people about it, but a lot of times you hear things like Linkin Park, for example, because they're going to come up on both of these lists. Like, I gave a little tidbit away there. Like a lot of people want to say, well, their first two albums were nu metal. Okay, well, yes and no, because while it's one of those things like, did they soften up? Yes. Were they still mixing rock and hip hop and electronic and metal all into one sound? Yeah. And I think, arguably now with Emily, their most recent output has been more nu metal than a lot of their, stuff after their first two, possibly three albums. So I'm saying bands like, for example, they didn't come up on either list, but Stained, because I feel like Stained's first album, well, technically Dysfunction was their first major label album, but their album before that, Tormented, sure, that's pretty much nu metal. And you can make a case for some stuff on Break the Cycle, but they have had a very long career of doing more ballady radio rock stuff. I'm talking about bands that, they might have softened up, they might have changed gears a little bit, but it's still, pretty comfortable to say nu metal. Those are my main criteria. My top 10 list is not a list of my favorite top 10. My top 10 is a list of bands that I think are some of the best in the genre and some that kind of transcend the genre. Like I said, I've been able to become more mainstream than just your average, nu metal band. As much as I love these bands, I'm not going to say Reveille. I'm not going to say From Zero. I'm not going to say Pulse Ultra. I'm not going to say Element 80. These are bands that are new AF, and I love them a lot, but the average person's not going to know who they are, and I don't know that culturally they moved the needle for anybody. I could be way off. Somebody could have been sitting around thinking, I don't think rap and rock really work together. And then somebody gave them a Primer 55 CD or a Factory 81 CD, and they said, oh, wait a minute. I love this now. So, if that's your story, awesome. But when I saw this guy's list, I was like, okay, hold on a second. Let me think about this. And so there are a lot of crossover, but you'll see real quick on this top 10 why I immediately said, hold up, wait a minute. So, okay, so let me start off by saying this Instagram page was called Metal Zone. And it's not a huge page, but it has 22.4 thousand followers. Now, in the grand scheme of social media, I know that's not a huge number, but that's like 22.3 thousand more than we have at Breakdowns for Breakfast. So they've got more of a following than we do. So somebody's following that page. I'm not. It just came up in my algorithm to piss me off, I think. So according to Metal Zone, here was their top 10 nu metal bands of all time. Number 10, Papa Roach. I can see that. For me, this kind of falls into the category of Stained. They've always had a little bit of that bounce and groove, but outside of Infest, it's hard to call any of their other albums quote unquote nu metal other than the very first one. So I do really like Papa Roach. I've seen them live a few times. They're a lot of fun live. And I think some of their newer stuff is really good. It's kind of like that Evanescence argument. I have a hard time calling it nu metal outside of that very first album. All right, number 9 is Slipknot. No arguments there, just too low. And then this is when I said, okay, whoever put this list together wants to make people furious. They have to, because at number 8 out of 10, Korn. That'd be like saying, who's the most important grunge bands of all time? And you list, Soundgarden and Alice in Chains and Candlebox. And then, aren't you forgetting one? No, I think I got it. What about Nirvana, who kind of like made the genre what it is? It's like, oh yeah, just throw them somewhere in the back. No. If it wasn't for Korn, nu metal does not become what it is. I've had this argument with other people about Rage Against the Machine and about Faith No More and all, even the Chili Peppers, like all these bands from the late 80s that started to kind of mix the hip hop. Hell, you want to get even more in the weeds, you can go back to Run DMC and stupid Steven Tyler Aerosmith shit. But as far as nu metal as we know it, it's Korn. They are the daddies. They're the big guys. So to put them at 8 is blasphemy and wrong. And then number 7 is System of a Down. Again, I've talked ad nauseum about System of a Down. They're fine. Yes, they are nu metal. You have to call them nu metal. I've never been the biggest fan. Number 6, Disturbed. Okay, this is another one that is it nu metal? I guess. Down with the Sickness absolutely is. That whole album is very new. And even some of the stuff after it. But, we've talked about this before. Nu metal and butt rock is cheek to cheek. And it's really hard to say, where do we draw the line? So for me, I don't necessarily consider Disturbed more butt rock or more new. I think they're kind of their own thing. They're not in my top 10. I'll just leave it at that. Number 5 is Mudvayne. Absolutely. They deserve to be in the top 10. I'll talk about them more in a minute. Number 4, Deftones. Again, love them or hate them, that whole argument about are they new, are they not? Yes, I do believe their first 2, 3, 4 records are more new than some of their newest stuff. But they've never shifted sound so dramatically that they're not, in my opinion, still, okay, maybe nu metal is not the first genre tag, but it's always going to be in the conversation. So, yes, whether people like it or not, they got to be there. And this is when I almost threw my phone across the room. Number 3, Godsmack. Godsmack. Okay, if you want to make an argument for Godsmack to be in the top 10, I won't fight you on it. But it's got to be in the 10, 9, 8 range. You ain't putting Godsmack at number 3 and Korn at number 8. Whoever did this, you are not a nice person. Number 2 is Linkin Park. I'll get to them in a minute. And number 1, they left as question marks. Well, who's the only nu metal band that everybody knows that is not on this list? Limp Bizkit. Of course, Limp Bizkit's supposed to be on this list. Are they number 1? No, they are not number 1. Why? Because Korn exists. Limp Bizkit doesn't exist if Korn doesn't exist. So anyway, moving on. Here is my top 10. Now, again, some caveats. I tried to take into consideration not just the top 10 of my favorite. These are 10 nu metal bands that I think are culturally significant or have longevity. That's another big part of this, is if these bands are still around, everyone on my list is still around in some capacity. Whereas, and I guess, and on that other list, those are too. Godsmack has kind of flirted with calling it quits, but they're not nu metal, so it doesn't matter. Anyway, so although I contradict myself right away. So number 10, I put Head PE. But in my defense, Head PE is one of those bands that was sort of a launching pad, I think, for a lot of people with nu metal, because they were pretty early on in the late 90s, where some of these other bands that people associate with nu metal, especially the boom of nu metal in like 99, 2000, and that time, Head PE was one of the earlier ones. So and again, I know they're one of my favorite bands, so I'm throwing them a bone here. If you wanted to put Papa Roach in that spot, or you wanted to put Disturbed, I'm thinking of bands I'm not going to mention, I would get that. But for me, I think Head PE, because they did have a little mainstream success. They've toured with POD, they've toured with Linkin Park, they've toured with Limp Bizkit, they've done all of these big things. So yes, you want to make an argument for not them, I get it. Number 9, I put Coal Chamber. They never got quite the mainstream success that, like some of these other bands have gotten, but they were on Carson Daly Live. They were on a lot of these big tours, and they're still playing a lot of these big festivals and stuff now. Now, Dez has some health issues, so they're not really putting out new music and touring like they kind of wanted to. But I feel like, especially that first album, but all these albums have that nu metal like bounce and groove to them. Even when they get that real like nasty, like Dez kind of goes full on with the monster voice, it's still new. So again, this is subjective. I'm trying not to just pick my favorite bands, because starting on the next few is definitely where it gets more like, yes, I like these bands, of course I do, but they're not necessarily my favorite bands. But anyway, number 8, I've got Mudvayne, because I do feel like Mudvayne is better than they get credit for. And I mean, LD50 to me is kind of an all-timer. I do think, the second album, The End of All Things or something like that, I think is basically just as good as LD50 in a lot of ways. It's a little bit more structured, but it's still wacky. The production's a little bit better, but I think everybody makes such a big deal about Slipknot and Mudvayne, not necessarily copying Slipknot, but they came around the same time and they have the makeup and stuff, but it's its own animal. And Ryan Martini's bass playing is incredible. And so I think Mudvayne absolutely deserves to be on the list. Number 7, I put POD. And here's why I did this. Say what you will about POD. Are they the heaviest band in the world? Absolutely not. Did they have some ebbs and flows? Sure. We've talked about them on the show a couple of times. Many times. We did one of their albums. Youth of a Nation. Boom. Rock the Party. These were songs that were on TRL. These were songs that were still on rock radio today, 20-some years after they were released. That atones for something. That's got to mean something in the grand scheme of things. Most of these bands can't say that. So I've got to give a nod to POD, because they were mixing the rap with the reggae and the metal riffs, and they still do. Their most recent album, I can't remember the name of it, Veritas maybe. I don't love it, but it's still got the same formula to it. So, yeah, I'm going to put POD in there. Number 6, System of a Down. Like I said, I don't particularly love System of a Down, but you cannot deny that they've had some big songs that, again, still on the radio today. Chop Suey is still a rock radio staple. I used to play it in some cover bands, and it always goes over well. So, again, we're getting to the part now of the list where I'm kind of like, yes, I like some of these bands coming up, but I'm also trying to recognize the fact of what they've done for the genre and so on. So, number 6, System of a Down. Number 5, Linkin Park. Again, yes, they sort of the middle part of their career, they got a little less aggro and a little more U2. I understand that. But they never stopped mixing guitar riffs with rap vocals and Chester screaming. Like, even on some of their like last albums before Emily joined, there's still elements of all of that in there, even on some of their softer stuff. So I don't know what you would call Linkin Park anything other than nu metal. Again, you want to go track by track, you want to go album by album, you want to get nitpicky, okay. But at the end of the day, I still consider Linkin Park a nu metal band. And what they've put out since Emily joined, I think just reaffirms that. So, number 4, I put Deftones. Again, we can nitpick all day long. But at the end of the day, Deftones, as very different as like Adrenaline and Around the Fur is versus Private Music or Saturday Night Wrist, it's still there. You know, it's still got those love him or hate him Stephen Carpenter riffs. It's still got Abe's drums with that. He's got a little bit of a hip hop vibe in him, whether he wants to admit it or not. And I don't particularly love Chino. He's never really done it for me. But it's still the package. It's still nu metal. And just recently, I think it was Darren from System of a Down was giving an interview talking about quote unquote nu metal bands, and he specifically mentioned Deftones. So I'm not saying that gives me any extra credence, but I feel like it should. So anyway, yes, we've gone on the record many a times talking about our feelings on Deftones. I'm not going to belabor the point, but I still consider them predominantly nu metal, and I feel like they have to be at near the top of this list because they're huge and they've always been big. So, yeah. Number 3, I put Slipknot. Again, we can nitpick the shit out of this and say, are they not? But at the end of the day, Slipknot is, for all intensive purposes, should never have gotten where they've gotten. Like, the masks, the lyrics, the aggro nature of those first 3 albums. Hell, they're still brutally heavy. They've just, Corey started to learn how to write hooks better. So, but shit, on those first couple albums, there's still hooks. There's still clean vocals. So, say what you will. This, I think Slipknot is really, really good band, and they're still more new than they are anything else. So, yeah, I put Slipknot at number 3. And then the next 2 should be absolutely no surprise. Number 2 is Limp Bizkit, and number 1 is Korn. I have talked ad nauseum about both of these bands, so I'm not going to sit here and ramble for another 10 minutes about 2 bands you've already heard me ramble about many, 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 many times. I will just say this. If you were not around in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, we've talked about TRL. We've talked about the Wild West that was kind of the music industry at that time. It's kind of hard to fathom. Music is so compartmentalized now that if you want to listen to blank, you go and listen to blank. But back in the day, you listened to the radio, you watched TRL, and that's how you saw what was popular at the time. To turn on TRL and see the top 3, 4, 5 music videos be some combination of Christina Aguilera, Limp Bizkit, NSYNC, Korn, and Britney Spears was like it was mind-blowing. And I don't think we even realized it at the time. But to think of, because you can look this up. There's videos of Limp Bizkit and Christina Aguilera performing together. Like, you don't see that anymore. You're not going to see Sabrina Carpenter walk out on stage with Korn. It's just not going to happen. It's not a thing anymore. So there's something to be said. Was it just the timing? Was it just whatever? But there's something to be said about how Limp Bizkit and Korn, specifically those two, were able to be as mainstream as they were, as they still are. They still sell out huge arenas. So, but especially those first couple albums, if you listen to like the self-titled record and then Life is Peachy by Korn and then $3 Bills Y'all by Limp Bizkit, there's some nasty stuff going on those albums. Lyrically, content-wise, the production's nasty. And the fact that those albums somehow launched these careers is wild to me. So I say all that to say, without Korn's first album, I don't know that NuMetal ever becomes as big of a thing as it does. And I definitely don't subscribe to this theory, but there's something to be said about how 1994 is when Korn's first album came out. That was sort of at the tail end of the grunge movement. I'm not saying NuMetal killed grunge like grunge killed hair metal or anything like that, because grunge was prosperous all through the 90s, as was NuMetal at this point, basically. So I just think it's interesting that there's always those like huge moments, and for NuMetal fans, it was Korn's first album, because again, it's kind of like one of those things. Is it the best NuMetal album of all time? They're self-titled. I mean, that's debatable. You can say it is, and I wouldn't argue with you, but it's also sort of the raw beginning stages of it. Even they are unsure exactly what it is they're putting out into the world. So I think that it's just the cultural significance. Once Korn started to, get a little bit of a following, other bands were starting to realize, oh guys, we can mix these heavy detuned riffs with these hip hop beats, and we can add like all these other styles into our own. We don't have to be just a quote unquote rock band. We don't have to be a quote unquote hip hop group. We can do all these things together. So number 2 is Limp Bizkit, number 1 is Korn. So there you have it. But anyway, I couldn't pass up an excuse to talk about NuMetal. And when I saw this guy's asinine top 10 list, I was like, hold up, I got to jump in here and say something. And I needed something to talk about today anyway. So, it kind of worked out. Who's your top 10? Is my list even remotely close to correct? I think it is. I know a little bit about NuMetal. I think I'm kind of on the right track. But if you disagree or you think something needs to be moved around, let me know. Send us an email, breakdownsbreakfast@gmail.com. Leave a comment, Facebook, Instagram, the spiel. I'm not going to say it all. But yeah, hope you enjoyed listening to me rant about NuMetal. I feel like I do it all the time, and I'm not going to stop. So yeah, I hope you have a great day.